Today's case deals with the death of very young children at the hands of their mother. So, just a trigger warning for you. Now, once I kind of get into this story, you might remember it from the news a number of years ago. It did make headlines not just here in Canada, but internationally at the time, but it was quite a while ago. And then, in addition to the story, I want to talk about filicide today as a topic. On the afternoon of June 5th, 2001, Pritpal Sandhu, who's the landlord at 203 126 14th Avenue Southeast in Calgary, knocks on the door of her tenant, Ria Fujii, who is behind in her rent and facing eviction. So, getting no answer and kind of concerned about the rotting smell that's coming from the apartment, he opens the door. The smell inside was completely overwhelming, but he's concerned that he doesn't hear any sounds from the apartment, which was furnished. It was a pre-furnished apartment, but it only had like one like old tattered sofa in the living room. He walks through the small apartment until he comes upon the bedroom door and sees, to his horror, the body of a small child, no more than 2 years old, laying face up on the bedroom floor and obviously deceased for several days. The apartment building is in the area of Calgary referred to as Victoria Park, which is a multi-family building, 3 stories, probably 50 units. Victoria Park is very close to the Calgary Stampede grounds. So during the day, it's quite lively. It's almost a trendy part of the Beltline area surrounding downtown. They've tried to do some gentrification in the area, but as far as living in that area, my kids went to high school around there, and my office is very close to there, so you kinda have to step over some stout crack addicts and be careful not to step on any discarded needles, so it's a well-used community, you could say. I'm sure I'll get emails and comments about it, but I'm just telling you my own experience from that community. So the day after the discovery of her young son's body, Ria Fuji, she's a Japanese woman here. She was originally on a student visa that had expired, so she's now in Canada illegally. She turned herself into police. Now, it's not clear what she expected to happen coming into the police, but at the time, she didn't think that she had committed any kind of crime. Originally, she was charged relating to the improper disposal of her deceased son. According to the criminal code, every person is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 5 years for improperly or indecently interfering with or offers any indignity to a dead human body or human remains, whether buried or not. This charge on its own likely would not have led to much more than deportation back to Japan. Um, After consulting with a lawyer, she planned on pleading guilty to that charge. But she told the police that she also had a 4-month-old baby named Gemini, who was also deceased, that she had wrapped in a plastic bag. And initially, she said she put it in a garbage can, but then later she said that she dumped her in the Elbow River. The charges were upgraded on August 15th, 2001, to 2 counts of second-degree murder. She had been held on an immigration warrant because, of course, she was also in the country illegally. So we need to go back a little bit. Ria Fuji was an attractive woman. She was originally from Swanochu, Chao. Um, do not know how to pronounce it, in southwest Japan. She had come to Calgary on a student visa in April of 1997 when she was 19 to study English as a second language. Her parents sent her $2,000 a month to help with her living expenses, which back in 2001 was not bad. Um, but she dropped out of school not long after starting. Whether she told her parents she had dropped out or not, I doubt it. Now, shortly after she arrived in 1998, she met a man named Peter Brown. In April of 1999, Ria returned to Japan when her visa first expired. Then she came back to Calgary on a visitor's visa instead. And when she returned, she got pregnant. And then on February 9th, 2000, she gave birth to a boy that had been fathered by Peter. His name was Dominic. And according to Peter, Ria used the money that she got from her parents to party and buy drugs. Now, according to Rie, Peter was abusive and took her parents' money from her to buy his own drugs. According to an article in the Calgary Herald by Mauma Fatumura, a friend of Ria's named Akiko Takayama visited Ria from the US in January of 2001. Now, Ria said that Peter did not have a stable job and Ria was left to pay for everything herself. Um, Now, to give some credit to Ria, at the time of her arrest, Peter also had warrants out on his arrest for assault causing bodily harm, 2 counts of robbery, and 3 counts of failure to appear in court. Now, Takayama, her friend, stated that from all appearances, Ria seemed like a good mom. She seemed to be coping well. But regardless, they moved a lot from like crappy apartment to crappy apartment. So Ria's visa expired in April of 2000, but she remained here illegally. And soon after Dominic was born, she again got pregnant and then she left Peter. She moved into a women's shelter in early February 2001. On February 24th, 2001, her daughter Gemini was born prematurely, so she spent 2 weeks in the hospital. And then, after Gemini's release from the hospital, she moved into yet another shelter. And in March 2001, she begins a relationship with a new man named Chris Noller. And in April, she moved into the apartment on 14th Avenue where her children would be found passed away. During this time in April, she would leave her children pretty frequently and sometimes overnight to visit her boyfriend at Chris's apartment. And she always told him that the kids were with a sitter. Um, when she would return and find them still alive, she figured this was fine. This was working out. So on May 3rd, Chris moved out of his apartment, stays with Ria and the kids for a few days until he moves to Cochrane to return to his father's home to live. And on May 8th, Ria left to visit Chris's in Cochrane, leaving them for 10 days when they basically starved to death. Now, here's where things get kind of gross. On May 18th, so 10 days later, she returned to the apartment on 14th Avenue and, to her surprise, finds Dominic and Gemini dead. She wraps Dominic in a blanket, hoping that the warmth is going to somehow bring him back to life. She puts Gemini's little body, tiny, tiny little body, into a plastic bag and throws it into a dumpster. Later reports said that she dumped it into the Elbow River. Either way, the body has never been found. She then returns to Chris's place in Cochrane, leaving Dominic dead in her bedroom. Now, on May 24th until the 30th of May, she returns again to the apartment, and Chris visits her there, completely unaware that Dominic, and for some reason doesn't ask where the 3-month-old baby is. Then from May 31st to June 6th, when she turns herself into the police, she stays with Chris again out in Cochrane. So during her arrest and until she appeared in court to face murder charges now, she was sent to the Peter Lougheed Hospital for a psych evaluation. And while she was there, she wrote a letter to her parents, who, until the police had called them, were they had no idea that she had met anyone, let alone had 2 children, and was in her second relationship. In her letter, she said, quote, "I have no idea why things turned out like this. I have never confided this to anyone, but many times I thought I would rather die. I was happy for the 3 years living together with Peter, but at the same time it was hard because he kicked and punched me. I cried many times, but no matter how abusive Peter became, I tried my best to create a happy family. I tried my best to become a good mother for my babies." End quote. And then also, while in the psych ward, other patients testified at her preliminary hearing that she had several sexual encounters with male patients and was excited when Tony Gallup, who had killed 5-year-old Jessica Koopman. Um, I do too many stories named kids named Jessica, so please don't name your kids Jessica. Anyways, I think that's 3 of them now in 7 or 8 episodes. She was also quoted as saying, "Many things have happened indeed. I should write a book about it and publish a book once I get back to Japan. Some publisher will be interested in my story." I certainly hope that that never happened. Now, Peter, for his part, made a statement heavily emphasizing with a lot of swearing and racial slurs that he never abused Ria, and that she had spent all of his money and was cheating on him constantly, and that he never knew that his kids were where anywhere because she wouldn't tell him. But that quote, "I really love those kids and miss them every day," end quote. Now, one of the robbery counts that put this winner behind bars briefly was the theft of another person's VLT winnings. And apparently, he had been on a machine that was losing, and the guy next to him won a stack of cash. Peter grabbed it and ran, saying he deserved it. He was rubbing it in my face. Now, during the court proceedings in which Ria pled guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter, there was debate between the prosecution and the defense regarding her mental state. The defense said that she had a personality disorder that allowed her to put her needs above her children's, which is basically narcissism, and that she also suffered from depression brought on by postpartum and her living situation, that she didn't ask for help because she was worried her illegal immigration status would be found out, or that she would lose her kids due to being impoverished. She also had been unable to confide in her parents back home because the babies were conceived out of wedlock. That would have brought shame and disgrace to her family. Now, interestingly, her parents were actually very supportive of her during her trial, and came out to Calgary to support her and to try to have the children's remains returned to Japan with them so that they could at least be close to their grandbabies. And when I say supportive, they were um, supportive in the fact that they would have taken in the babies and loved them, not that they supported what she had done. The prosecution, on the other hand, called her selfish and that she sacrificed her own flesh and blood for her superficial pleasure. This egotism is the very antithesis of parenthood. The judge indicated that Peter Brown played a significant role in the children's death, saying, "There is little of flattering nature to be said about Mr. Brown. He may be described fairly as a common criminal with a penchant for drugs, gambling, and stealing other people's property. Sadly, these children had a great misfortune to be born to a mother who could not care for them and a father who would not." Now, Ria herself gave the following statement. She said, "I know what I did was mean and cruel and disgusting thing to do to little babies. It was not right. It was the wrong thing to do. I don't know why I made those bad decisions." Now, Ria's parents, Hidito and Tomoko, said that they hope and believe that Ria will rehabilitate herself and will make a fresh start in life to contribute to society someday. Um, they were actually just the classiest couple. They thanked the people of Calgary and the organizations that tried to help her. They asked the city as a whole for forgiveness for her. Um, Forgiveness for her giving you certain uneasiness and trouble. We would like to apologize to the Japanese community for her hurting their image of being good residents of Canada. So she was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and then she would automatically be deported after her sentence was finished. So on May 4th, 2006, she was released and then accompanied to the airport to be deported back to Japan. I haven't actually ever been able to find any updates on her current whereabouts. Ria Fuji is actually a common name. There is a YouTube celebrity with that name, although I'm pretty positive they're not the same person. Um, but so that's the story. But I want to talk to you about this kind of case in a little bit more general detail. Crimes against children have always been the worst kinds of crime. But when the perpetrator is the child's mother, it just seems to go completely against nature. So, a Calgary Herald database of every homicide in the city that goes back to 1990 found that there were 12 mothers who had killed one or more of their children. So, um, totaling victims in those cases altogether, they're about 3% of all the homicides between 1990 and 2015. Now, filicide is the killing of a child by a parent. It's fortunately very rare, um, but there are pretty equal numbers of moms versus dads that have killed their children. Since 1990, 10 fathers have been charged or convicted of killing one or more of their children. Yet there's some really key differences to the outcomes of those cases. Of the 8 mothers that were on trial for murdering their children. Four of them did not have any charges against them. None were convicted of the charge of murder. Every case resulted in a conviction on the lesser charge, like something like manslaughter or inficide, or a finding of not criminally responsible due to mental disorder. The only exception was Marie Magoon, sorry, who was convicted of second-degree murder in the death of her six-year-old stepdaughter, Mika Jordan, which there's a video on Mika Jordan. It's terrible. In 2011, you can also listen to she's Crime Beat with Nancy Hicks does a story on Mika Jordan. The number of fathers, though, that have been on trial for murdering their children is quite a bit smaller, mainly because two of the men killed themselves afterwards. So that left eight. And of that eight, five of them were not charged. But all three of the cases that did wind up going to court were convictions of either first or second degree murder, which included the Mika Jordan case that involved the stepmom, but also the biological dad. So it seems like there's a lower accountability for moms, and I'm not understanding why that is. Like, I don't know if it's just that society thinks that in order for a mom to kill her kids, she has to be really sick, whereas dads are seen a little bit more predatory. The legal threshold for a not criminally responsible, or what we call an NCR, is actually really, really high. The criminal code states that a person has to be so ill that they are incapable of understanding that their actions were even wrong. And since 1990, there's only been 12 Calgary homicide cases that ever ended in not criminally responsible findings. And only two of those involved mothers. The most recent was back in 1998, which is quite a number of years ago, when Lisa Santos strangled her baby Samuel. She was found not criminally responsible because she was suffering from postpartum psychosis. She believed there was an evil woman in her bathroom mirror that was protecting her, that she was protecting her son from. So, mothers who kill newborns are categorized a little bit differently. They get charged with inficide, which is a really old law that says that women um, suffered a disturbed mind as a result of not being fully recovered from the effects of childbirth or lactation. Um, like, is childbirth a mental disorder? Like, no, it's not, but it can, I guess, lead to depression, and depression can lead to more serious mental illnesses. So the law has been kind of kept around. But the maximum sentence for infanticide is actually only 5 years, which is a lot less than the mandatory life sentence that comes with a second degree murder conviction. So between 8 and 12% of mothers experience some kind of postpartum depression. For the majority of them, it's very treatable. Now, here in Alberta, public health nurses, they actually come out and assess you in your home after the birth of your child. It doesn't matter how many children you've had. Um, at least they did this when my kids were born. They check to make sure that if you're nursing, that's going well. They just kind of do an assessment of your living conditions and your mental health after the birth. So hopefully that prevents some postpartums that turn into psychosis. But now let's talk about the reasons and kind of motives for specifically mothers who kill their children, because this particular kind of crime confounds me probably the most. I mean, they all confound me as far as a choice to murder someone, but your own child, I just can't really wrap my brain around that. Now, according to the World Psychiatry Association, mum murderers have one of five motives. So there's an altruistic filicide, where that's a mother who kills her child out of love. Like, she believes that the death of the child is in the child's best interest. Like, this is like the suicidal mother who doesn't want to leave her child motherless to face this intolerable world, or maybe a psychotic mother that believes she's saving the child from a fate worse than death. Then there's an acutely psychotic filicide. A psychotic or delirious mother kills her child without any comprehensible motive. So that's the mother that's maybe following some kind of hallucination command to kill her children. When fatal maltreatment filicide occurs, that is usually um, something where death was not the predicted outcome of that. So that's like things like cumulative child abuse, neglect, Munchausen syndrome. Now, there's an unwanted child filicide. That's a mother who thinks of her child as a hindrance or a burden. And then there's the most rare, which is the spouse revenge filicide, which is when a mom kills her child basically to like specifically for to emotionally harm the other parent. Now, I would say that Ria is kind of a combination of maltreatment, like neglect and unwanted for sure. I think she saw her children as a burden. Another thing that the World Psychiatry Association says is that a child is most at risk of homicide by a parent in their first year of life. Um, the most recent similar case to this one that I found was in December of 2019. There was a 19-year-old mom, Verpi Kudu in Sussex, that left her 20-month-old home alone for 6 days while she celebrated her birthday. The outcome was pretty similar. She got a guilty plea to manslaughter rather than murder. Her baby has been under child protection with a plan, but had not had a social worker yet assigned to her case. Now there is actually I was just covering a case, um, almost exactly like this of baby Jalen. I covered it on my exclusive, but, very, very similar situation. Mom went away to party for 10 days. Um, so clearly this is a case of severe neglect. So let's talk about that. Like I myself, I was a mother to young children at one time. I was a single mom to very young children, and I found new parenthood. It was very overwhelming at times, and at times I felt isolated and probably depressed. But I never neglected my kids. I do remember those kind of nudging feelings while you're like, oh, you're packing up this a baby into the snow chute. You put him in a car for this 5-minute drive just to maybe get some milk or something. And those, you always, oh, what could possibly happen in 5 minutes? But 10 days, like, it's not the same as running out to the mailbox or something like that. So, like, what can cause this kind of neglect in our society? Well, according to a legal article that was written by Alan Collins, neglect is the ongoing failure to meet a child's needs and is the most common form of child abuse of all of them. A child left hungry, dirty, inadequately clothed, um, doesn't have the right living conditions, missing school is considered a form of neglect, just not being supervised. He or she may not be thriving, receiving inadequate health care. Neglect can also leave the child vulnerable to other forms of abuse, right? You don't watch your kids, other people can come into the picture. Now, there's no single thing that causes child abuse, but neglect usually tends to occur in families where there's a combination of some risk factors, families that are under pressure and have a lack of support. So, some of the causes are poverty, lack of education, serious marital or relationship issues, violence between the parents, lack of support from extended family, lack of knowledge of child rearing skills, loneliness and social isolation, unemployment, inadequate housing, and mental physical health on part of the parents, obviously, including substance abuse. So we could say that some of these issues were happening in Ria's life, but it seems more that she was kind of like a me before they kind of mentality. Um, like we hear about kids that are left with not a lot of food and unclean conditions, but if you have a narcissist for a parent, like, I think Casey Anthony she had none of these issues in place. She wasn't unemployed. Well, I guess she was, but she wasn't lacking for money. She didn't have a lack of education. She wasn't living in poverty. Um, and I and this story, though, feels really similar to that one, other than, of course, the guilty plea. But we all, of course, know that she did it. And seemingly, I think, for the same reasons that Ria did. Personally, I think that these cases need to be taken a lot more seriously. I'm a little tired of the "it's not my fault, I was abused" argument. I do have compassion for the experiences of substance abuse, traumatic childhoods, but I don't think it's ever an excuse to let your baby starve to death. Like imagine when your little one cries for food and to just be held and I just imagine them just laying in their own filth and just cry. Like it is a torture. and I think it should be seen for what it actually is. Now, fortunately, these kinds of crimes are pretty rare. So this was a really big case in Calgary here at the time, but um, it's really unfortunate that I haven't been able to follow up on her and see how, like, where she is now. Once again, the Calgary Herald has amazing archived articles that really sort of help me piece this story together for you. They are my go-to source for any murders that happened around here before 2012. So they were my main source for this episode. I need to take a break from the kids ones. They're really tough to research, but they happen, and they don't have a voice anymore to tell their stories. So I think they're very important. So I'm going to be back with another case, probably not a child case. Thank you so much for watching.